Despite existing policies and schemes aimed to improve women's employment, we find many women still unable to access skill development. Not just that, joining the workforce is difficult for many, owing largely to gender norms that push them to perform roles of primary caregiver and homemaker.
We address this and more on the panel Foundational Life Skills for Transforming Women's Workforce Participation.
Please join us in giving a big round of applause as we welcome our panelists and moderators on stage.
Welcome everybody to this next panel and the discussion as we were thinking about this program. One of the issues which we wanted to highlight and take forward through this conversation, the first panel talked about the system change issues related to the education space, especially for adolescent girls and their readiness uh, to get on into the adult life with a different mindset, with a different set of skills, a different perspective to engage with the adult life. The other space which we keep seeing, and you would see in several of these conversations, the Viksit Bharat goals of 2047. This whole conversation happening that if you're looking at uh, a transformed economy for the country, labor force participation of women is a critical issue. And despite the numbers we see, changes in methodologies which are happening, uh, anybody who is working in this space understands there's a massive challenge at that level. So there's another bunch of engagements which are happening uh, in the women's workforce participation space. There's another a set of actors who are engaged in attempting to create system change initiatives to bring in more and more women into the workforce, and especially the paid variety of the workforce. uh, this panel, we are attempting to create a linkage between the whole system change efforts which are happening in the education space around the adolescent girls, their foundational skills which are getting created, and there's a different set of actors who are working on bringing in women more deeply into the paid workforce. So our realization is that these two set of actors are not very tightly connected, whereas there is a potential for a tight connection between these two set of actors because it addresses the same continuum. So our conversation today will attempt to look at this space, and we will try to dig deep into the structural barriers, the policy spaces, the initiatives which are being taken uh, to bridge and create a connect between these two spaces. So maybe I will start off the conversation with Yamini. If you can talk about the structural barriers which, as women transit into the labor force from the education space into the labor force, what are some of the structural barriers, and have there been, studies and in the Indian context, what are some of the critical issues in the Indian context which women face while they are transiting from the education, maybe a 12th class or a graduation, to the workforce? What are some of the structural challenges they face?
Thank you, Anirban. I mean, one of the things that just face us is the fact that India and this region, South Asia, the MENA region, has the largest gender gap in um, women's presence in the labor force. And when we say presence in the labor force, it's not workforce participation, right? It's also women and men and boys and gender diverse individuals who want to be looking for work. So you're considered in the labor force if you're at any given point in time in the last, there's a set period, some measurements take 1 week, 1 year, 3 months. So sorry to get a little nerdy, but I just wanted to lay that out that this, the gender gap is almost at 70%. So if we say that, let's say 15 to 20% of young women at any given point in time are looking for work, 90% of young men are looking for work, right? So this is one of the starkest, sort of, you do like a heat map, you can just see that, right? This is one of the starkest sort of facts that when we take an age specific, age segmented look at the data, this is one of the starkest things that stands out. So to just reinforce what Anirban and the previous panel was also sort of flagging, we are making advances, at least in very formal ways, in education. The GER today for higher education is almost equal. The gender ratio is almost 50. But when you look at workforce translation, it actually has a huge fall. So from the livelihoods literature, so this is one, right? And I think everyone in this room is very familiar. So please take this as just creating a common sort of a language and a common set of foundational understanding of the space. I think the livelihoods literature is talks about rural livelihoods. The adolescent literature talks about school to work transitions. The employment literature talks about women's work participation. So there's a very fragmented way in which we even our understandings and our learnings from each of these sectors is actually not informing one another. Right? That's the second sort of challenge from a systemic perspective. And the third, of course, we all know policy is fragmented, but at least you have line departments that are responsible for certain accountabilities. It's our job to sort of figure how to bring it together. I think we've had, like, I don't know, when I was a young student, like in my fifth standard, and my mother was a journalist, she talked about convergence. Today, that convergence work is back. It's used to be integrated rural development. Now we talk about convergence. And so I think there's a fragmentation there that that meets all of us who want to work in this sector. Now, in terms of what we understand by way of how norms, belief systems, structural challenges sort of play a role, I think one of the first ones is that there is very, very low confidence in any institution. And we have to take an institutional landscape rather than an individual landscape, right? So, institutions such as employers, institutions such as schools, institutions such as organizations within an institutional landscape, such as panchayats, there is low expectations of young women. And this includes families, right? Households, families, peer groups. So there is a real sense that there is, she's going to work for a couple of years. Skilling is only going to be in a few, let her do some beauty or some tailoring, right? So these are common things. The 3P framework, we know, the pickle, papad, I forget what the third, petticoats. so, so you have every sort of element of whether it's skilling, whether it's employment opportunities, whether it's outreach. And we all know the evidence in terms of also training. When do trainings happen? They happen at a time of day when women and girls are busy. We don't even count gender diverse and other sort of groups in any of these literature even, right? So there is no specific outreach even made. They are done in a language that's probably alien. They are done in spaces where you don't necessarily have an inclusive space, not just in terms of disability, but also in terms of caste, in terms of social identity, etc. So there are these known things. We've known this for many years now, and there's quite interesting ways that people are trying to solve it, but nothing has really happened at scale. So when we look, so these are sort of the parameters in terms of just even accessing available opportunities, whether it's for skilling or employment or work. Now, when we look at a sort of second tier of the social institutional landscape, there is a whole network, right? We all have now talked about networks. We do have collectivization. One of the, I guess, the world's largest collectivization program in the world is in India, the Rural Livelihoods Program, riding on the shoulders of many, many decades of non-government programs that have invested in social capital. And I think here what you find is while you have networks being built, so what, right? What are those networks for? And so when we take, and I'm taking a very livelihood specific sort of lens, and we have National Livelihoods Mission. So the goal is to create livelihoods, but there's a long foundational setup that's needed of different kinds of investment and think beyond finance. And we know that, no, and we know And we know that the Livelihoods Mission has made impressive gains in terms of financial inclusion and financial linkages, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So when we sort of start to look at that networks and how do women get, I think you need some recharge, like communicate yes on that note. How do they communicate? Where do they receive information? And there is a huge sort of constraint when it comes to just accessing basic information, right? And within this, there's a interesting sort of concept of structural constraints. Nancy Folger talked about it about 50 years back. But I like that idea because there's a way in which structures enable, but structures also really constrain your ability to even access what's out there. And so that's where I think we have to really start to sort of think about, problematize these issues. Structural constraints in young women's achievement, if those who do achieve, who do have become role models, and let's say they do sort of, you know, grow into participating in the workforce, there is a limited return from the market when you look at wages, when you look at the quality of work, when you look at the time. So even though few that make it through, there is a huge limitation in what returns they get. Now, how does that then inform family decisions? Is there is underinvestment, because you're thinking, what is the use of going through all of these different kinds of efforts at a great social and economic cost of getting young women in the family trained and set up for college and maybe even employment opportunities when the returns are so low, right? So that has a what we call a discouragement effect for both young women as well as for the families. As I think there are some very common constraints that we all know. I'll just list them so again we get on the same page. One is when you move past that initial sort of opportunity sort of journey, there's a mobility constraint, right? And we've all, I think this is some very, very live in the gender sector right now, conversations around mobility. How do you break them? What are the costs of not solving for them in terms of both education as well as employment? And linking to that, the question of safety, right? And so this, even in the very, very senior women entrepreneurship space, which is women above 35, I think are considered older women, there is still a constraint. So I'm definitely there. um, and so that becomes another, remains a strong constraint, and we are not yet solving for this. Care. I think this goes without saying, unpaid work, the care burden, and globally, unpaid work is highly feminized and is seen as rightfully women's work. And in India, of course, everyone's seen the time use data that women work 7 times more than men in terms of household chores, unpaid work. Now, the implications of this on markets as well as on opportunities is very, very clear. There's one, women are just not, are, it doesn't mean that women don't work, right? All women work. This is considered work. But to be in the workforce, there is a certain amount of time that's needed and a certain kind of design of programs that's needed, which is very, very limited at this point in time. Um, at the same time, we have also ways in which the same sort of normative ideas reproduce not just at the family level. We always bash the family and say, okay, families are sort of the early norm sort of gatekeepers, but all institutions actually reflect the same kind of norms. all institutions from schools to financial institutions to police stations to employment exchanges, they all reflect the same sort of gender uh, uh, discrimination and gender, let's say at the very least, gender blindness. Discriminate if you take a bit of a spectrum. So, in that gender blindness, again, there is limited opportunity created for young women. There's limited financial institutions. Again, it's a space that many people, everyone on this panel and some of the audience knows very well. While you have financial products created, loan products created for women, they are not really solving for all the other issues and structural sort of barriers you have when it comes to livelihood, full and effective livelihood access, and the ability to turn that financial inclusion and financial access into a productive opportunity for yourself. And so, Mudra loans is a very famous example. Mudra loans, of course, is a famous example. One is just that we know the largest take up by women is of the smallest size of the loan. At the same time, um, it's also a very convenient write off, right? Because it's such a small loan that if you repay or don't repay, it doesn't matter. So you're communicating essentially to women who are the biggest subscribers to that loan that take it, but we don't really care how we're not going to monitor it. So then what happens? You go into a financial institution to say, I want to create a business, and you have an extremely intimidating and semi hostile environment, right? And so we were talking about schools and this amazing work of, just sensitizing teachers, the educational institutional landscape. The financial institutional landscape is nowhere near, right? We've not even crossed that first step of figuring out why should bankers think about women and how should they think about women, despite the headlines that women are the biggest bet that financial institutions can make and have made in India from the NPA's data, from, and so that paradox is something that we live very comfortably with. That it's great. We want to, showcase this as a headline, but we are not actually figuring out how to serve this customer as in all of her needs. So again, the link back to young women, right? What is the link back there? Because today the labor markets are not elastic enough to absorb everyone who has an aspiration. So today you have school-based entrepreneurship training programs. Why are we talking about entrepreneurship so much? Because we know that majority of the youth will need to figure out and become job creators because there's just not enough jobs out there. Now, if you take rural India, that becomes a bigger challenge. And so if we are not making those linkages and not creating formal work or creating semi-formal work that looks decent, that has decent quality returns, then what is the messaging we are giving to localities, to parents, to communities? That listen, it's really bad work. She's going to get paid so little. It's all in the informal sector. So is this really worth it? Do you really want to risk the mobility, a mobile, visible young woman to actually take up this one? So I don't know if I can sum up in a nutshell, but I think the idea is that there are many known constraints, but there are also constraints that are not just familiar. They are institutional, and markets and states reflect many of the same values and the same sort of divisive, the same kind of gender blindness and often, going to the side of discrimination. And so if these constraints are so heavy and hard for women, the mothers that the young women and gender diverse individuals see, then I think the aspiration that's being formed is also extremely constrained.
Yeah, very interesting points. I think, uh, like, I work a lot on the livelihood side. So every day there are new products getting created. But these kind of structural challenges and the foundational gaps which are there for young girls who are coming into this space, like the Mudra loan which you were talking about, there is a requirement of a 10% to 15%, which the person has to put in. The family is not willing to give any collateral or any even support the girl to put in that 10%. So there are several of these structural issues which one has to navigate. So moving on to Dolon, as we have, as Yamini talks about the structural challenges from a research academic lens, what have been some of your practical, as you have worked in your own engagement, some practical examples which you saw as women were transiting from the education space to getting into livelihoods and into the workforce? What were some of the the challenges which people faced, and the critical issues which we as a community need to solve for that smooth transition happening from the education to adult life, which is fulfilling, both as an individual and also in terms of the economic returns which come in.
Uh, Thanks, Breakthrough, for having me here. I'd just like to add with Yamini. I mean, when we talk about that on ground experiences, we just a couple of structural barriers which we know we all know, and which is very common, but that is still there. So if you start from the family, which is the foundational institution of patriarchy, specifically Brahminical patriarchy, what we see that the barrier first comes from there. All we all know, and the community, and through what the gender-based violence, the mobility restrictions, discriminations, and all the harmful norms. Since you have asked me from experience from ground, I mean, it comes in mind when I talk about this what are the structural barriers. I think the in Azad Foundation, when Kolkata program started, the woman of the who was the first batch. Now she is a very successful cab driver in Kolkata. In the we do have various tests before we send the woman for the employment as a driver. So in one test, though she was very good in training and all, but in one test she failed. So I asked her that what happened, how come you failed? Because you are very good throughout the training. She started crying, and she said that uh, um, since her husband doesn't want her to be a driver, the night before the test, whole night he raped her, and she couldn't stretch her leg, and because for the driving car you need to stretch your leg. Sh- she couldn't, and she failed, of course. And within our trainees in Azad, in all four cities, 85 yeah 86% are survivor of violence, and within that, maximum are survivor of domestic violence. We are not saying that public place violence is not there, but when people say that women are not safe outside home because there is violence, how come women will drive at night, or how come women will do this kind of job where you have to be there 10 hours 8 hours out of home and on roads, because violence is there. I would like to humbly remind them that violence starts on women at home. So I think that is one of the major structural barrier along with others. Another thing I would like to emphasize, often when we talk about the structural barriers, we put focus on family and community, which is very important, and which is true. I mean that starts from there, as I said also. However, the role of state and employer is equally important. Lack of gender inclusive, or we can say gender expansive infrastructure, has been a huge structural barrier for women to join any skilling program and then to the workforce. And when I say gender, of course, it's all inclusive, particularly when I say women, that's trans and cis and queer people. So and also, I mean, I would love to share some data. Very recently, we did a bus depot audit in Delhi, because as you know, who are Delhiites, that very recently DTC has started taking women as bus drivers, and more than hundreds women are there as bus drivers, and therefore we started to audit the depot, that what is the infrastructure there. And I mean, I mean, it's so sad that, yeah, there is basic level of toilets, washrooms, and many of them don't have the running water, don't have the sanitary napkin disposal system, vending machine of sanitary napkin, no questions. Lock is very loose, lock is not there, not well lit. One bus driver was saying one day when she was urinating, suddenly saw a a monkey in front of her. Can you imagine what traumatizing situation is for a woman, working woman? I mean, working, as she said, all women are working, but women who are working for earning. I'd like to give example of very recent study what Azad did in Kolkata in 142. Azad with along, I mean, in collaboration with Sabar Institute in Kolkata, 142 words we did the audit of public toilet for women. 300 toilets we covered, and we took interviews of 7,000 working women, particularly from unorganized sectors or vegetable farm vendors, domestic workers, cleaners, drivers, gig workers, and all. And it came out that, I mean, the running water, washing this I mean the soap, so liquid soap, or any kind of soap, sanitary napkin, nothing is there. Locks are not there. Most importantly, the in paid toilet, the guards are men, which is extremely I mean, uncomfortable for women. I would just share quickly our data. You know about Shialda and Howrah station. Those are two important stations in Bengal. And there, in one station, there is 9 lakh footfall per day. And in another station, it is from 1.5 million to 1.8 million footfall. In Howrah, that is 9 lakh footfall. And we see, just a minute, I'm getting old, so I can see. So in Howrah station, only 33 toilets for men, 19 toilets for women, and 5 for people with disability. And those stations, we have photos. We have showed it, and then if you see press last 2 days in all Bengal presses are writing about that. Hope something will happen. And if you see the photos, 94% of women are saying such a dirty toilet, and no water, no cleaning, nothing, as I said. And in Shialda station, it is 23 toilets for men, 24 for women, 3 for people with disabilities. And when in the previous panel we are talking about gender neutral toilet, which is absolutely required, but see where we are. And this infrastructure, not only toilet, creche, space for lactating mother. In Delhi depots, we just looked that is there any space for, because women drivers and conductors, and these days in women there is some women, क्या बोलते हैं उसको, women जो होते हैं बास में, जो सेफ्टी के लिए आफ्टर निर्भया केस they have given marshals, right? Thanks. Marshals are also there. So all of them are saying that this is 8-10 hours outside. They don't have any space, because space is so male dominated. There is a canteen, but they can't go to canteen because canteen may all those men colleagues are there. I mean, I'm not blaming them. They are also not taught how to behave with women colleagues. That's a separate question. But they can't sit and eat in the canteen because always there has been a male dominated ambience with the all the slangs and the jokes and everything. They don't have any space to change. So they wear the dresses, driving dresses. They have uniform, and they can't change. They have no space to change. They have no space to rest between one duty to another duty. So this is the huge problem, and I would like to emphasize not only on the problem from family and community that is always there, but onus also should be taken by the employer and state to provide gender inclusive or gender expansive infrastructure if we really want women in workforce. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you, Dolan. uh, I don't know where for 70 years we have been talking about these things, and in Delhi, if this is the situation, what are these kind of shifts which are going to happen? It's pretty depressing on the expectation which we have from the state and their ability to respond. And increasingly, my thought has been, we should keep on asking for that, and keep on you know putting stuff in press, putting in the public domain. But despite that, we have to move, whether or not the state responds. It's our job to keep on talking about it. But so possibly, uh, within, if these are the given constraints, what are the shifts we can bring in, we as practitioners? That's where our focus has to move. Nivedita, can you lay out what are the what are the policy structural frameworks which are there? Once the previous panel talked about the NEP and the changes which has happened in the NEP, although the details are not there, but at least it has given the space to look at foundational, life skill education for young people, and especially for girls coming into the adult life. But what are the other structural, the policy initiatives which are there from entire women workforce participation space? What are the different initiatives which the government has come up, and some discussions, also new ideas which are getting discussed? If you can lay a landscape on that, that might help the conversation.
Just wanted to say thank you all. It's such a pleasure to be here, and the discussions from the morning are really sobering, but also fill us with hope and a role where we can all come together to do something. And that's the spirit in which I'm going to try out some new ideas. So I'll be watching your faces, and that'll be a little barometer for me. So, having said that, see, we have to look for opportunity. And I think with the poly crisis and the continuing new global headwinds and geopolitical crisis, all kinds of opportunities might arise. So I've been very keen that let's try a future first sort of view. And I know you're all going to groan and hold your heads when I say 2047, but there are opportunities there that the policy framework, I think, throw up. And also because everybody's scrambling for ideas. It really is people thinking together. And I think we can seize this opportunity if we organize. So that's the spirit with which I want to look at the policy framework. And I have 3 points. Been thinking about this. The first point is that let's view education, employment, employability, and entrepreneurship as part of the same complex of, I mean, for lack of a better word, human capital development. I don't mean to sound extractive, and you know what I mean. But so I'm going to respond to this within the context of India's inclusive economic growth objectives. We all know the famous 6 to 8% of annual growth and higher per capita incomes, Atmanirbhar Bharat, as well as Viksit Bharat. That creates a very large framework, a policy framework at least, where the government is willing to go, what is willing to do, what is the problems and challenges that they themselves foresee. And as we realign our notions, I think, of these foundational life skills and take a future first view, it has a kind of, by bringing these together, learning kind of seamlessly needs to translate into livelihoods, and skilling needs to seamlessly translate into jobs, and innovation needs to seamlessly translate into enterprise, uh, at the minimum, apart from all the other issues. Now, this needs to happen, and we have disparate and siloed sort of policy frameworks. We have the NEP 2020, we have the Skill India, we have the Startup India, etc., etc., etc. It's a dhobi list, frankly. And it all needs to kind of be aligned and realigned into some sort of policy roadmap to 2047, where we can also find our space to contribute. And of relevance, I think, to us just now in this conversation are the two phases towards 2047, where the first phase is where we're going to shift from a capital led to a skill led growth through big investments in education and skilling. And the second phase, which comes a little bit later, is moving towards technology led growth, which is driven by innovation, infrastructure, sustainability. So I think this creates a huge framework for us. And that's the first very large point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is that the future first view is important also. Why? Because everybody currently in school will largely form part of the Indian workforce in 2047. So that is a very sobering thought. The our time starts now. We don't have any time to waste. And a large proportion of these are girls, as we've been discussing, and youth and women. And I'm tired of the word youth in policy documents, because when you say youth, it's like farmer, you think of a young boy. So, and then you say adolescent and you think of a young girl. So I don't know, we need to find some kind of picture thing for this. But I'm referring to young women and of various, not women only who are assigned at birth. So a few points here on the thing that everybody talks about, the demographic dividend, right? Potentially. So, what is the opportunity here? The opportunity is that we have 20 years, only 20 years, to capitalize on this dividend. Our time starts now, and we have only 20 years because our working age population is going to peak around 2047. And then we have an aging economy. The conversations we'll be having here then, if I'm alive, will be very, very different. The second is that the real engine of growth is job creation. And job creation will be informal employment, the gig economy, the agrarian informal sector, which itself is projected to contribute to 50% of the GDP in 2047. So, this is an opportunity for the rural informal economy. We can't wish it away. And the third is, where will these future jobs come from? Now, some say that sectors, I mean, there's all kinds of people. Sectors like electronics, energy, chemicals, automotive, services, these are going to lead growth. Uh, so, does our workforce have creativity, skills, tech know how to meet this projected gap of 50 million? It's huge. And then women are the potential. This is acknowledged that women are a potential engine of this growth story. Why? Because if we need to reach this 30 trillion target GDP in 24 by 2047, we need 145 million women in the workforce. But without proactive measures, as we all know, uh, the female labor force participation rate is not going to rise beyond 45%. And that's the sharpest point I want to leave us with. The opportunity for us. We need to get our act together. There is a policy framework that allows us to say that 70% of women projected to be out of the labor force in 2047 will be in India's rural areas. We have a 20-year window to change this. If we can double the female labor participation from the current 35-40% to 70% over the next 20 years, we won't only meet this large GDP goal, we will power it. If women power it, women will change the norms. That's what. Can I do my third point quickly? I can stop. Yeah, sure.
So I think, as Nivedita was saying, we keep on many of us in the development sector, we roll our eyes at the Viksit Bharat 2047, but it's an interesting item because uh, it is there and not very near. So it doesn't mean that whatever, so conversations when it happens, and because we increase, we have a significant engagement in the policy space. It's an interesting way for bringing in new ideas, because people feel that they don't have to act on it immediately. So they are willing to look at ideas. They are looking. There is an openness for new ideas, things which in the current frame of reference people are not willing to bite on. They are willing to listen, willing to think about it. So it is a crack in the window. This is a space we need to use more and more to bring in new ideas into this space. And what Nivedita has laid out, this whole uh, you know uh, it's almost like opportunity which we need to grab, or in another 5 7 years, if we don't act fast enough, it's gone for the country. So in that context, Yamini, you have been working with multiple different sets of actors in the civil society space, in the philanthropic space, who are looking at the economic transition issues, especially for women. You have been working with the corporate corporate side of things, the market forces, the people in the markets. So with this engagement with a bunch of actors, diverse actors, and as this event is called Reframe, uh, what is the, in this kind of a juncture in time, what's that reframe we are talking about? What's that space you see where these diverse actors, they're coming together for solving such a potential for women, which is almost a generational opportunity which exists for the country?
I take away your mic, you won't be able to stop me if I go over time. Okay. Tall order, but I think I'm. I don't think there's going to be anything new to say, but I think women's women and girls limited opportunities in this 4E framework that Nivedita laid out for um, education, employment, entrepreneurship, and employability. Um, it should be seen as a market failure. It is always seen as individual failure, community issues, community norms, families not doing this, schools are not providing quality. But overall, from an economic perspective, it is a huge market failure. And so if we are able to frame the problem that way, we, as in those of us in this in this sector, because we shy away from engaging those big macro issues often, because there is a complex access and a complex engagement needed, and we are more comfortable in policy spaces than in market spaces. And please feel free to tell me that I'm wrong, but I mean, it's certainly a personal recognition for me in my own journey also, that we shy away from them for various reasons and for good reasons. And so markets get away with a lot, right? Because you are not engaging enough. We don't know where those powerful nodes are, where we should be engaging. Our fallback is the state. But when we look at state is the most powerful actor, not just for policy, for human development, but state is the greatest policy maker for markets as well. And so how do we then make that journey possible and make that catalyze that change that we want to see in market systems? I think for me, that is one of the first reframing that we need to do. And we have to boldly engage markets. We all do, but engage the state as a way, as a regulator, as a policy maker, as an enabler. I think we saw this coming out of COVID, where the state quickly implemented something called the PLI program, which was the productivity linked incentive to boost industry, especially MSMEs. Now, many of us have been hearing conversations and have been part of conversations. Can we think of an employment linked incentive system? So it's not that the state doesn't know or doesn't have tools and instruments on hand, but what's the incentive for states to do this? And there, you know, markets have to become our friend as much as the biggest sort of entity we want to be able to change, shape, and influence. So this is one. The second, I think, is this, and there are examples, right? I think in the Orissa government, in the textile industry, has a wage subsidy that it's made available to factories. For men, it's some 5,000, and for women, it was 6,000. So now this textile is an already over feminized sector. So can we think of instruments like this that can actually, where states, markets, and civil society can come together to really think through what are some of these solutions, and do they create sustainable change? I mean, we shouldn't forget that many things also cause backlash. And so we want to be able to, take that journey to understand what kind of social and changes that one is unleashing through some of these. But there are promising shoots around state, especially in at the level of state governments. That's sort of second, point. I think the cash transfers is the other big thing we are seeing now. I think it's 20 states or so have implemented cash transfer programs. And for adolescent girls, we've had very, very epochal and very well known cash transfer programs that have been, aimed at changing age at marriage, behavior change. I mean, the problematization of behavior. I think norms as behaviors maybe something we can talk about. But I think there's a lot of promise that one has seen. However, I think the conversation is not happening on cash transfers versus what. What are we giving up? We are giving up job creation. We are giving up other kinds of programs. Are we giving up, welfare programs in the sort of race to sort of see, direct transfers, because those are seen as catalysts for markets, for certain kinds of conditional changes that one wants to see. But I think this is the other sort of instrument. So this is where, again, there's no role for markets in this. And so how do we actually then bell the cat, right? And so how do we actually, and that requires very, very sustained, studious effort. Yes, unpaid effort sometimes on the part of civil society, but to really try and understand what, create the intellectual capital to engage boldly on these big policy changes that are coming our way, and that are replacing and supplanting maybe other kinds of policy changes that could actually help with some of the challenges we are speaking about. The third big wave is AI, digital. I mean, sorry, we didn't talk about it as much as we should. Yes, you have them. Okay. So I'll keep my point very limited, but I think this is, two areas, digital and services, right? These are two areas that are seen as more than manufacturing, that these are two areas where women are can potentially, especially on the services front. But digital and AI, we've had a very troubled relationship with it when it comes to just basic digital smartphone access. I see Priyanka who's taken that. But AI is like, wiping away these old problems, right? And just creating a whole new set of problems. And markets are where none of us are. So markets are getting ahead of everything. So I think the challenge for us is how do we, I think the conversations are very, very limited right now. We are sort of saying, okay, how do we train women to take on AI jobs, right? Or at the very low end of that value chain. Or we are thinking, okay, which are the jobs that are going to get lost, and then are we going to lose, and where do women sort of stand vis-a-vis that? We need a much bolder sort of sense of what is AI, how does it transform society, how is it transforming workplaces, how is it going to transform labor markets. And I think, as Nivedita said, there's lots of crystal ball gazing by lots of consulting sort of companies that we've read, and they're very, very thoughtful and interesting, but which is the truth, right? Like somebody says 350 million jobs, somebody else says 100 million jobs, somebody else says, oh, we're going to actually lose more jobs than we can gain. Like where do we go, right? So I think this is again where policy engagement becomes super critical. So I'll just make a last point about services, which is where I think we've sort of said, okay, women they're hyper feminized, sort of care services, healthcare, but that's like the largest sort of job creation, that work opportunity creation that we're seeing now there. And that comes with a range of maybe it's tuitions, education. Let's also expand that care to like much larger. It's never just childcare, it's elder care, it's education, it's beauty, whatever. Let's make a very big sort of grouping there. Now within that, we are also now pushing care entrepreneurs. We're saying this is very, very interesting. Like let's GST, right? What is the first barrier? It's documentation, GST. Some very practical barriers exist, right? Which are waived when it comes to large corporates. But we are not really thinking of, okay, where's that individual woman entrepreneur going? Yes, give her some subsidies for loans and mudra, etc. But let's also deal with some of these structural things that prevent women from engaging markets in spaces that may be hyper feminized, but where they have opportunity with their low skill, with rural sort of presence. But how do we actually transform that? So these are maybe 4 ways in which I think how do I put it? Nivedita said there are a lot of actors and things, but how do you create the right symphony when it comes to,
So, so shifting. So there's a whole bunch of things, Yamini, which you have raised, and actually, mm, uh, as you talk about the digital shifts, simultaneously there are geopolitical shifts. So we are actually at a kind of a watershed moment. So we really don't know, say, 20 years down the line, what is the shape of the society and the ways economy is going to turn. We are at a unique time in history, uh, and some of those things will get clearer in the next 3 to 5 years, and we have to possibly adapt to such situations. But one starting point which comes from your remark is at least the conversations need to start, and possibly like Breakthrough has taken this initiative to put a group of people together. Possibly our panels have to be more diverse. Possibly we have to bring in different people into the room. The audience and the panel need to be far more diverse than we ourselves being echo chambers. So, moving on to the next part, I was thinking that as we talk about reframe, the first panel talked deeply about the system shifts which are happening in the education space, especially the middle and the senior secondary, secondary and senior secondary spaces, and the mindset shifts which are happening. And then there is this whole bunch of actors who are engaged in women's livelihood spaces. So, what do you see are some white spaces for uh, these two actors? Yamini talked about a more diverse set of actors, corporates, market players, civil society actors, policymakers. But if we look at even within the civil society space, the set of actors who are working in the education space and the set of actors who are working in the economic prosperity space, what are some of the white spaces you see in terms of these two sets of organizations coming together, doing things together, making that transition far more seamless than what it is now?
Um, I think it's happening. It has started happening that collaboration between these two sets of organizations who are working on education and a livelihood domain. However, when we talk about education, often we miss to think about skill education. And if we see the NEP 2020, there's been in the last panel also they discussed a huge focus on vocational training. And there is also a gender fund under that policy. So one thing I think where both the set of organizations in civil society can collaborate to bring the non-traditional skilling within the NEP implementation framework, because there is and now that is totally in vacuum, because the policy is there but still implementation frameworks are state wise is getting built up and all. I mean, I think that MP is the state who is doing the good thing, and West Bengal and Kerala has to dismiss that policy, and many things are happening like that. But wherever it is getting implemented, I think that is the area the both set of organizations can work together to explore or to include that non-traditional livelihood and just think beyond the PPP. What she said in the beginning, the PPP model, that papad, pickle, and petticoat model. And I think here I would like to add one more point. That is, when we think about non-traditional livelihood, we have to have also be very expansive on that, and it needs to be contextual. So because I mean, I'm just saying, because these days we are talking about this a lot. Non-traditional livelihood is deeply contextual. Maybe for a seized woman from a slum, for her maybe not doing क्या बोलते हैं उसको, stitching and tailoring and all, but doing driving or plumbing is non-traditional. But from a remote village or from a marginalized group of people where women are only manual scavenger. From them, if they come out and do a cook, become a cook in a Brahmin's house, that's not traditional. I mean, we know someone who has been from a manual scavenger community, a woman. Now she is a lawyer, the first lawyer from her community. Though if you see, the women lawyer is non-traditional in that way, but it is highly deeply contextual. For her, this is for our communities totally non-traditional. We know that mental health survivors are now in income generation space, where nobody takes them as nobody considers them as labor. Now they are earning through through maybe the block printing or making potteries. Though generally you can say that it is not so non-traditional, but for them it is non-traditional. So non-traditional is highly contextual, and we should collaborate in this space, all the organizations together. I think there is a huge scope also. One is NEP, and also this non-traditional livelihood and skill education is, in today's world, it is really, and it's very good that it is a buzzword now. All governments are talking about this, be it central, be it state government. Both set of organization can take this opportunity and negotiate with the government, because to them non-traditional livelihoods just to bring women and train them and leave them. So I mean, just I'll take 1 minute. We saw that in West Bengal government, they trained women in driving, but many of them are now again back to kitchen, because when you bring women in a non-traditional livelihood, and women or queer people in a non-traditional livelihood, we have to be very conscious about their context. You just can't train them and send them to the work. That doesn't work. We have to have, as someone in last panel said, that the confidence and all. So what we call is skill plus plus. Along with the technical skill, you have to provide the other skills, life skills and empowerment skills, where women can understand that to be in our male dominated section, I have to be like this. So those kind of skill development is very important, and where the educational institution and livelihood institution can collaborate. And finally and lastly, that there is a framework which we co-created and we use, and these days many organizations use a lot, that NTR network also uses it, that gender just skill education framework, where we talk about that the students, you can't see them in isolation. We have to engage with the community. We have to provide the transformative skill education, which is skill plus plus. We have to sensitize employment market and then engage with the policy. These four pillars are, it needs to be done together. And in these four pillars, in either one pillar or in all four pillars, both the civil society organizations can collaborate and work together. And I see there's huge hope and there's huge opportunity to work together. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Lalan. Uh, Nivedita, if you can talk about as these global shifts are happening, the digital shift, uh, the the Trump effect, geopolitical shifts happening, and several of these, the biggest impact actually with the Trump tariffs is on the textile. and all these things, this massive skilling to placement of girls happening from all the way from Jharkhand to Bangalore, those are the sectors which will be worst hit in this. The impact will be worst felt in those sectors. But looking forward, what is that reframe which is there as we look at these kind of large macro, watershed issues which we are dealing with today?
I, I, I think just let me just limit it to three very simple points. One is building on what Yamini, of course, what's going to happen in the textile industry. We hear from Yamini very soon, I'm sure. But in terms of the, there are in terms of the macroeconomic trends, I think it's important in this room to at least throw the two into the pot. The first is, of course, the digital dividends, which are another frontier. I'm looking at it from an opportunity point of view. Like, what is the opportunity for us? For us to bring all the young people, old people, bring women in, basically. So it rests strongly on the other PP, the private public partnerships. But half the population may still lack access, right, to devices and so on. And women, for example, make up only one third of current internet users. So there's a huge space here, and we need to bridge this if we are to invest in inclusive digital transformation. And the other macroeconomic trend, a mega trend like I call it, is climate change, which we really need to look at because it's shaping policy and is creating new spaces to interact with many, many new actors. So that's one which requires, even the net zero framework that the government itself has set up creates a huge set of opportunities we need to talk about because that's where women are going to be. Otherwise, where will they go? They can't only teach and whatever they do. But I would like to just get the third, whatever they do, yeah, because the new world is going to pass us by. And the third point, just very quickly, I think I look at CSR as government policy. Mandated CSR, voluntary CSR is a thing of the past. It is a huge policy framework. A lot of money goes into health. The Niti Aayog's goals for social sector spending are not being met by current CSR. Number two, the goals that have been, most of it money goes into health and education, and there is going to be growth. Gender equity is very, very low. There are studies that show it. It's in the public domain. And issues related to livelihoods is third. So we really need to look at this and say, what is the kind of reframing we want of CSR? CSR, there are arguments that CSR, who are we to decide, right? TRI's recent report has got some flack also. But really, I don't agree with it one bit. I do agree with this report that this is part of government policy and therefore it needs to pull together with the policy framework. And NGOs really need to be part of the narrative. Today, NGOs are off the table, except larger ones. And so I think that's something we in this room really need to look at if we are to seize the opportunities of the future for the people of today, girls of today who are in school today.
Thanks, Nivedita. We had planned for a set of questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we started 15-20 minutes. No, we started 30 minutes late. What we can do is we can just gather the questions. Okay.
We also have Mr. Keshav Kanoria from Britspan, who will be giving a donor perspective on this theme.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. So just a quick intro to Britspan. A quick intro to myself. I'm a partner at Britspan. It's an advisory firm. We work very closely on both sides, funders, philanthropy, CSR, etc., and NGOs, social change makers such as Breakthrough and others. So we have some perspective on both sides, and I'd like to share this more as a hypothesis. It's not like a whole lot of funders find adolescent life skills. I think that was the topic that I was given, that, I'm going to stick to that lane, or foundational skill building for adolescent girls to prepare them for the workforce of the future. And I'm so glad we're talking about this topic. It's an extremely important one. I think, especially in the dynamic economic world that we're talking about, where jobs are changing, you don't even know what's going to be the jobs of the future. I think foundational skills become even more important. Things like negotiation, problem solving, communications, digital literacy. We talked about AI, financial literacy, etc., etc. How do we get more philanthropy, more funding behind some of this? Right? There are NGOs working in this, but funding still seems to be small. It's underfunded, etc. As you all know, the funding landscape is evolving, and as we speak, it's a very, very dynamic thing. International aid is, of course, suddenly kind of gone bust. Foreign philanthropy is kind of stagnating in India. Domestic philanthropy has kicked in. I think domestic institutional funders are giving more money to different causes. CSR is, of course, a growing segment, growing at about 10% a year. I think earnings, in line with earnings growth. And the good thing is, I think CSR is becoming increasingly strategic. I think a report we did in 2024 actually says that CSR is now looking to invest a lot more in systems change, innovation, ecosystem building. They are more open to collaboration as well. Also on the domestic institutional side or individual side, what we're seeing is the new gen, next gen coming up, I think a lot more, and they'll be taking more responsibilities in the future. They think differently about their approach to giving. They are also more invested in more niche causes, etc. New things like social emotional learning, mental health, climate equity, gender equity. I think there's a lot more propensity to give in the next gen and new gen that you see than the traditional this thing. So therefore, what I would suggest, I think, to NGOs out here and all of civil society, I think couple of suggestions. Right, one is, and these are probably not new. I've kind of come up in panels in this one and the previous one. I think integrating into existing systems is important. So as you think about the education system, how do you bake into the curriculum? If you think about the health system, how do you bake that in? As you think about rural development, how do you bake in gender equity principles into community institution building? Right, those are the things that are getting the money. The education, health, I mean, that's the reality, right, at this point in time. And so how do you bake that in? How do you start to show outcomes in those things, right? So let's say by actually incorporating life skills education in the education system, how is that improving learner retention? How is that improving learner engagement? And then over time learning outcomes. I think those can be proven in a relatively short to medium term, whereas the workforce participation kind of metrics will take time, right? Because you look at intervening at the age of 10, 12, 13, by the time they hit the workforce, they're at 18, 21, 24, right? So, funders typically don't have that level of patience. And so how do you start to show more near-term, medium-term outcomes as leading signals of success, right? That then eventually lead to better work outcomes. And the other thing is, how do you leverage the power of the collective, the power of the many, the multiple NGOs that work in this space and the multiple actors, etc. How do we go with a unified narrative on this topic, right? How do we show evidence? How do we go with unification? And on the part of the funders, the ones who are funding this kind of work, can they serve as champions of the cause, right? Can they help build and strengthen the field? Can they go more behind it? Because eventually we are all in this for humanity, and gender as a topic is all of humanity, right? So can we all create a movement around this? I think that's all for now.
Thank you. But possibly that is the reframe. That the near termness of investments which are there, that's the reframe which is required, and that's what possibly we have to engage on, looking at metrics which are longer term, and that's the engagement which I hope Britspan and the NGO community together can reframe the metrics which the people who are putting in investments. If those pathways are reasonably clear, that if you make these foundational investment, there's a greater dividend happening in a 15-year, 20-year frame, rather than looking at only near-term gains in term of specific, uh, assert test results, going far beyond that. That's the reframe we need to talk about. So I'll just open up the house. Let's only collect questions and possibly use the lunchtime to have conversations. But let's have Any voices, any comments, questions, anything, maybe four or five, if you can pass on the mics.
Hi, I have two small questions. First, in terms of we spoke a lot about digital literacy and financial literacy. What we often see in India is that there's a lot of programs focusing on foundational skills such as smartphone distribution in Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan, and then we have some sort of advanced AI, etc., skilling, ICT skilling in India AI mission, etc. However, there seems to be a significant gap covering foundational literacy towards more advanced skilling, and how can we sort of bridge that gap for marginalized women across the country? That's the first. And second, when we talk about non-traditional livelihoods, we see sort of some CSR or company investment in the mining sector, the manufacturing sector, to incorporate women in non-traditional sort of job roles. However, we kind of look at necessarily maybe all women operational lines as a good thing without maybe looking at technical upskilling. So what role does technical upskilling have in sort of incorporating these women in addition to the maternity leave and obviously safe environments and decent work standards, and how can we sort of build pressure in those regards as well?
Yeah, there's somebody there. Yeah.
Hi. So where I'm from, sorry, from Sri Lanka, we've been stuck at women having a labor participation in the formal economy of 30% for the past 3 decades. And the reason it's been stagnant is not for the lack of investment in, um, you know, improving financial literacy, in infrastructure. All of that is there. Investment is also in that, but the reason is also because I feel we don't look at how the care burden falls, unfortunately, heavily on women. So while improving skills adds on to women's plate of that is already very full, we don't look at the counterpart of their the male perspective and how we can engage with men and other counterparts and how we can share that burden. So yeah, what are we doing to improve that? Because we are investing, but clearly we're not making a significant enough impact.
Thank you. I had two quick kind of related points. I wanted to bring back the attention to something that Kantaji said in the beginning on male engagement and male participation and working with men as well. So my question was, are we doing enough for that? Because I mean, it is very obvious that there are still expectations from men as well, and how do we address that and how do we change that? While women have started, so there is this imbalance. While women have started getting empowered and started pushing back a little, uh, the men are their expectations still remain. So that imbalance needs to be addressed. The second is related to that as well as around power dynamics. I mean, we are talking when we're talking about equality, we are talking about someone giving away a little bit of power. So how do we address those power dynamics between men and women? So that was just 2 points that I wanted to bring up.
Any other? Uh, So, yeah, please.
Rural skilling programs and like urban. I think because we are working with rural population and we know that very well that we have done so many skilling programs for girls, but there are see the market is only at the urban level. The other thing is this, so there is a gap basically. Like these rural girls actually cannot get that kind of job due to many other reasons actually in the urban places. And it's systemic problem basically because we lack that kind of support and infrastructure from the government itself. The other problem is all about like all the skilling programs, government skilling programs or like run by any like private entity. All are basically the all setups are like in urban places. So it's very difficult for a rural girl actually to actually go and get skilled over there for 1 month or 6 month program. And like also like gender gap is also there. So in rural situation where there are so many barriers and patriarchy is very much strong, we actually there is a huge gap actually that we are not seeing, that we have to actually bring all policies and programs basically up to that level. So I don't know if someone can actually uh, talk about that. I would like to know more about it. Thank you.
So maybe but several of these questions or comments which have come are what do you say? Uh, they are reiterating the given challenge, and possibly there are no direct answers to it. It's all of us, we are in the same struggle. But coming to this last point of the skilling, there was some person in the panel, I think Nivedita talked about it, Yamini talked about it, that actually going forward now, this whole skilling business is very much job oriented. Jobs are not there, and as we go forward, jobs are more, so jobs are not going to be there. So the skilling industry itself has to reorient itself for entrepreneurs, self employment, and job creators, entrepreneurship. So that shift is a little different shift. And typically skilling institutions are not geared towards that. The policies are also looking at 3 months pay slips have to come. Acha, where are the pay slips? There's a whole now an industry which has got created to create these pay slips. So flogging a dead horse doesn't make any sense. So we as actors and in this space, we have to come up with ways in which we know that there is a small percentage of people who will land up in jobs, but the rest have to we have to look at opportunities in the local economy. So in TRI, we do a lot of work. Maybe separately we can connect on that. Looking at uh, uh, hyper local opportunities. So every area where we work, we would have about 100 to 150 local opportunities which can get created. So those are the matchmaking which has to happen there. That if I am interested in something, we use a occupational proclivity test to map out what are the occupational proclivities the person has, and then looking at what are the local opportunities and fitting them into those local opportunities again. And then you have to solve for what Yamini was saying: how does she get a GST registration, how does she get a DPR made, how does she get a bank loan, in the bank loan how does she get margin money to be placed in this. So we create ecosystems in small towns, in block towns, for set a kind of a panel which provides for these kind of solutions. But again, these we can do it in 20, 30, 40, 50 places, but the country is too large. So these things have to come into the ecosystem, and we are working with several state governments to incorporate some of these issues in the ecosystem. There's one program you can look up in Uttar Pradesh. There's a CM Yuva program which is happening, where this whole entire ecosystem is being provided for 1 lakh people every year, but only about 20,000 out of that are women. So that's the other challenge. Anyway, coming back, any other reactions you would like to have on the comment?
Quickly, one thing. While I totally agree that entrepreneurship is one way of going ahead, but I still feel, particularly at least urban and semi-urban area, there are new jobs are being created, and this green shoot economy is coming up. I know there are limitations, as you said, that there are huge areas and huge. I mean, we need to engage with the companies, and we have to negotiate with them to make it as gender inclusive workforce and all. However, having said that, I little differ with this whole discourse about the focusing on only entrepreneurship, because if women don't go through employability at least for 5-10 years, it's difficult for them to become an entrepreneur. What our experiences says, first, as you all said, that they don't have the capital, they don't have access to these social resources, even social capital. And also many times we see that is totally being hijacked by the men of the families. So I think I would suggest that well, one way is looking at the entrepreneurship, but just not dismiss the areas of employability. There's a huge scope of employability in new job market, and we see the Titan is having a whole women company. The many companies are having now the whole all women company in manufacturer. Tata is having that. So I know that there are limitations. There are the areas we need to fight there and we need to negotiate with them. Those are there. But of course, there is also opportunities employment. And I think for women's larger, I mean, the final empowerment and all the employment is the to start with. I'm not saying that entrepreneurship is not a good thing, but I'm saying to start with women from particularly the marginalized caste, class, and gender should start with the employment. That's my point. Thank you.
Great. And any other? Nivedita, have any? Mm. Okay. So I'll not attempt to summarize and not keep you from your lunch. So we can continue this conversation over lunch.